Yes, let's go for it.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Economy and Skills Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting. Today's meeting is being held virtually via Microsoft Teams, and therefore it is an informal meeting and no decisions are being taken. And at all times, items being discussed are for information and consideration. So item 1 on the agenda is notice of recording and webcast. First of all, I'd like to advise members that this meeting will be webcast for live or subsequent broadcast via the Council's meeting YouTube site, and that members of the press or public may record and take photographs except where they are confidential or exempt items. So move on to item 2, which is apologies. I've had apologies from Councillor Cornish, Morell and Sandhu. Have we had any other apologies?
I've not received any of these.
So move on to item 3, which is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations from members? I see no indication of any declarations, so we'll move on to item 4, which is the redevelopment of Birmingham Smithfield and surrounding area. So moving on to this item, I'd like to welcome Richard and Timothy from the Inclusive Growth Directorate, who are going to be doing a short presentation and talking members through the redevelopment at Smithfield. I believe this committee has held a keen interest in the master plan and have received regular updates. So if I can hand over to Richard to give us some background and context, as like myself, there's quite a few new faces on the committee who may not have as much knowledge, and then we can move on to some questions. Richard, over to you, or is it Timothy? Are you going to?
Yeah. Well, morning. Some feedback then. Yeah, I'm just looking to see if Richard is on the call. I'm just not sure if I can see if he's on yet. Richard is having problems getting on. Okay, right. But yes, I'm Timothy Brown. I'm a principal planner in the city centre team. And I think Richard's having a few technical problems. We're not related, but we've worked closely in terms of the Smithfield project. Richard much more in terms of the joint venture proposal, and me as a planner in terms of the wider context, but also the master plan and how we're looking at the city centre. And we've got a presentation that we're going to do now. I'm just hoping Richard will be joining, because he will focus on the Smithfield and the Lend-Lease sort of joint venture, and then I will give more of the sort of wider context. I'm just looking to see if he's joined, and I'll share it now. Is he on yet, or is he just
not as yet?
I've resent him the link.
Is he not?
I'm trying to get him on.
Sorry, so I'm sort of but yeah, so I'll load up the presentation, but I think really the first part is very much for Richard to do. I mean, maybe I can do it in reverse and focus on my stuff. You know, we was going to come after, but I could always do that first if he's struggling. But I'll just try and share it. But and of course, when we're doing the presentation, happy to receive sort of questions. Sorry, it's taking some time to load. In terms of what, so hopefully it's coming on now. But yeah, obviously in terms of the city council, as you're well aware, we had the master plan adopted in 2016, followed on from the Birmingham Development Plan, and of course now we're very much looking at the next chapter and the next phase in terms of updating that with Lend-Lease, but the wider context in terms of our future city plan, which is looking to replace the big city plan. So there's a lot of strategic planning context, but also in the background to that, there's clearly been a lot of interest in development and planning applications and schemes. I think it's loaded now. Can you all see that presentation?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can see that now.
Brilliant. Is Richard now with us? No. There's still no sign of Richard.
No, Richard's not. I mean,
Shall I go to my stuff first then?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you want to do,
Yeah, because I think he probably won't do what he's done justice in terms of detail. So I'll get to my stuff. Right, okay. Take that off. So yeah, sorry for that anyway, but in terms of my presentation, and I'm happy for people to raise their hand or ask questions, it's very much focusing on that strategic context. So you've probably all been aware, hopefully, of the Our Future City Plan, which was out for early engagement at the start of this year. It's very much a non-statutory development plan, and it's looking at the principles and themes that we wanted to start the conversation in terms of the vision for the central area of Birmingham up to 2040. It will very much build on the successes of the Big City Plan, which I think was adopted in 2011, but it's very much about creating a future central area development frameworks and how it will feed into the Birmingham Development Plan review. And of course, the big question is, well, what do we mean by central Birmingham? And it's very much growing the reach of the central area beyond the middle ring road, and how we reach the inner city communities by creating sustainable network of neighbourhoods. And there's a theme on it, city of centres. So we're really trying to ensure that there's that connectivity. There's the transport hubs, and there's importantly that range of social and physical infrastructure. Maybe the Big City Plan focused on sort of major flagship projects within the heart of the city, but this is very much about how we then reach out and connect to the inner city areas. And of course, every plan we do has a vision, and I think we obviously went out with this early this year. And it's very much a vision about putting people first and asking what type of city do we all want to create. And of course, it was in the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has had a significant impact on everyone. But what does that mean for the city? And what does it mean going forward in terms of potential trends? The high street, obviously retail has had a lot of change before the pandemic, but even more accelerated since. We've all seen a lot of changes at the moment with the office market. I've hardly been in an office for the last 18 months. So what impact will that have? And how are we going to ensure that the central area will function and thrive? And also the big agenda is clearly the climate emergency agenda, and how we're going to ensure that the sort of significant ambitions of Route to Zero are embedded in the plan. So we want to create that inclusive, resilient and green city. And it's very much about building people-centred places. So as you can see from, I'm not going to read it out, we're very much looking at this innovative global city, how it's connected and culturally distinct, and a city, where we're proud of its DNA. And again, they're the sort of key four principles that will guide the actions and plans in the strategy for Birmingham to 2040. So this green, equitable, livable and distinctive city, and that will really run through the heart of all the sort of plans that we do. And it's going to be 6 themes that we've developed to deliver the vision. and they are important, and I think that's where there's more distinction from the big city plan. So we have the city of growth for all. We need to provide opportunities for growth and ensure this investment is available to everyone. A city of nature, we're placing nature at the heart of the plan, and this will be key to tackling climate change, creating places and improving health and well-being. The city of centres, Birmingham is not just the city centre, but it's a network of unique neighbourhoods, and this must continue to evolve and be resilient. And then the city of connections, having a city that is well connected by walking, cycling, public transport is vital, and it will allow everyone to have access to the central area. And then a city of knowledge and innovation. This is very much about how we are investing in education and learning throughout our communities, and we provide everyone with the opportunity to learn new skills and share knowledge to create a sustainable workforce. And then the last one we've done is the city of layers. And this is about what are our buildings and places and spaces, what should they reflect and celebrate, and what's the key culture of our city and the communities, and it's going to be very diverse. So it's ensuring that opportunities are there for our rich arts, culture, creative diversity, and it's very much about, you know, what are people proud of and what is the DNA of the areas. And I think what we are really looking at doing now is from the Shaping Our City Together engagement document, we're going to start focusing on the renewal areas, and these will be the areas of major opportunity for change, and they'll be different in scale, opportunity, and they'll also be the key for delivering those sort of 6 city themes. And they will very much, these areas go beyond the ring road, and Smithfield will be really adjacent to the Ray Valley area and these other areas. So it's about how we ensure we maximise the opportunities, and that will come forward in terms of the draft central Birmingham framework that we are now doing. Will be out for consultation early next year. And in terms of the engagement that we did at the start of the year, overall it's very positive. People really got behind the vision. They liked the sort of themes, particularly the sort of city of nature and city of layers. And we had significant Be Heard questionnaire responses. I think it was over 200. There was a short survey again. I think we had over 230. We had 50 formal representations from the community, developers, landowners. And, you know, there was obviously questions raised, maybe asking for more detail around some of the sort of density or tall buildings, but in principle people were very supportive of the vision and then wanted to know how we were going to look to deliver that. And that is clearly what we'll be working on now in terms of the draft Central Birmingham framework. And this is just to say that, you know, again, in terms of the Smithfield context, the Ray Valley SPD is really adjacent, or the Ray Valley urban quarter is adjacent to the Smithfield site. And that was a supplementary planning document that was adopted, went to Cabinet last October, was formally adopted by the end of the year, and it's got that vision, and it's a framework for the future redevelopment of this area. And of course, this area covers some of Birmingham's oldest neighbourhoods, parts of Digby, Cheapside and Highgate. And it's been renamed the Ray Valley Urban Quarter, given the focus on the transformation of the River Ray into this unique waterside development. And this is an exciting area where there could be potentially over 5,000 new homes. So again, it's very much about how we ensure there's that connectivity, how there's the linkages through from this area to Smithfield and into the city heart. And sorry, there you can see the sort of potential or the indicative layout, and that is how we will see the vision. So you can see the greening of the area from Highgate Park into Sudge Streets. The Smithfield site is there, but you can see the sort of how we're looking at the sort of potential blocks, the new connections, and the focus on the River Ray. So this is a really exciting opportunity. And this is just to show that, yes, okay, the first one there is the Smithfield site, but in the wider area, there are a lot of development sites, and it's about obviously the planning and all colleagues from transport to conservation to design, ensuring that we're creating, you know, really strong places and the placemaking principles there to ensure that we create these high quality neighbourhoods. So it's just to show how important strategic context is, and what, Smithfield will really be at the heart of that. And again, you're probably aware of some of these, but well, not being the case officer, but I just wanted to highlight some of the schemes that, that have come on board in terms of approved schemes. So Oval Estates, it's very much centred around the custard factory, creative hub in terms of including plans to turn the Duddeston Railway Viaduct into a high-level park. And it's very much opening up, previously hidden stretch of the River Ray. And then, of course, it will deliver significant homes, job opportunities and commercial and leisure floor space. So, again, it's very much how we're making sure that we have that strong vision, and particularly with the Our Future City plan, we're looking at it up to 2040. And at Upper Trinity Street, again, is an application with, significant residential, and I think it's over 5 acres. It's very much transforming the industrial land into this cultural, commercial and residential development. And the Digby Bus Carriage is a scheme which is very much going to, again, create, significant residential opportunities, but it's also going to bring into play sort of inaccessible canal frontages, and very much looking at the quality of the heritage there and how we're going to create this new waterfront destination. And then probably the last one I was going to sort of highlight is the Smithfield House, Wolverhampton House. It's a very much hotel-led scheme. And this is the sort of proposal that shows the importance of how we must ensure that the Smithfield Master Plan and the updated one with Lend-Lease is crucial to ensure that we have the uses and the opportunities within the framework of how the council and key stakeholders want to see it developed, to ensure that we maximise the opportunities. So I think that was my presentation. I'm happy to have any questions. I think Richard has probably now joined us, hasn't he? So I can go back to the beginning so he can do his. But thank you.
Thank you, Timothy. Thank you for giving your part of the presentation. Shall we take any questions on this section first? So if any members have any questions, and then we'll move on to Timothy to do his part. Richard. Sorry, Richard. Okay, so I've got Councillor Shaman Lal first, and then Councillor Aiken.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Chair. What we are all excited about this development, any development in the city centre, but what we are told, being given that any development in the city centre are going to benefit all the other areas, but I'll have to know how. Because while the major developers are willing to invest a lot of money, billions of pounds, like in Smithfield Lend-Lease, can you tell us which developer are going to put money in the inner city area and outer city areas? And so really, it's something which I need some clarification, or is it just a selling point to say that a major development in the city centre are going to benefit all? I want to know how, where the money is going to come from, and who's going to do it.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, just in terms of the wider, in terms of the central area that I sort of showed, in terms of reaching out to the inner city areas, the Our Future City plan will very much look at maximising the opportunities for all. So the draft Central Birmingham framework is going to identify the 5 areas. So you'll have the central heart, and then it'll be north, east, south and west, and we'll be looking at the sort of opportunities linked to those city themes. So whether there's the city of nature in terms of green routes, sud streets, or whether there's the mixed use residential in terms of the growth and the housing agenda, but it will be very much looking at what are the opportunities, particularly in terms of the community. And there will be a delivery plan. We will have a consultant on board this autumn, so we'll be looking at what are the, in certain areas there will be clearly a phased approach. There will be some constraints. So what do we need to do to ensure that we can bring forward these sites or unlock the potential? And they'll be looking at the sort of opportunity in terms of central government funding and regional funding. So that will very much be how it would look, and it will be a delivery timetable. So I think that will very much arrest or hopefully support some of the concerns that you had about, well, how will it ensure that there is the wider growth within the central area, and it will very much focus on, as I said in the presentation, the sort of central renewal areas, because they're where there's the major opportunities for change, and I guess it will also be linked to some of the enterprise zones. So I think that's really the way we're doing that. And of course, our future city plan will then feed into the Birmingham Development Plan review, and that will be the statutory development plan that will have the land allocations and have policies. And on the back of that, there will be an updated Section 106 requirements and the sort of SIL. So that will ensure that developers will have to, contribute to that area in terms of the wider opportunities, particularly in terms of social infrastructure. So I think that's the way that we will look to ensure that, it's not just that development in isolation. It will ensure that the whole central area will get the benefits.
Thank you. Councillor Aitken.
Yeah. Hi, just two quick questions from me. Thank you for that presentation. Firstly, I thought it was really interesting. I was really pleased to hear you kind of mention the climate emergency in all of that, because sometimes it can feel like it's not mentioned as much as it should be, yeah. Despite us declaring one. So I was wanting to know, are there any plans to carry out like climate risk assessments as part of this body of work? And if so, do you know what the kind of the parameters of that will be, or what it will take into account? And then just at the end there, you mentioned residential opportunities. It might be too premature to ask this question, but do you at this stage know what sort of percentage of the dwellings will be considered to be affordable? Thank you.
No, thanks for the questions. Yeah, I mean, the sort of route to zero and the climate change and the green industrial revolution, that will run through everything we do, particularly in planning and particularly with the Our Future City Plan and the BDP review. Like I say, we will have consultants on board that will really look at everything we do, in terms of the mitigation, but also the opportunities will have to feed into the whole green agenda. So the detail will start to come forward, and we'll work with Maria Dunn's team. And of course, there's going to be a new assistant director that will be leading the sort of route to zero development, I think next month. So it will be very much embedded to it. So the detail will come, and I'm not an expert on that, but it will very much feed into I suppose the thing with this draft Central Birmingham framework, it's a framework which will have the hooks for the detail to come off it, whether that's planning briefs and the requirements. So the detail will be there to ensure that we maximise the opportunities. In terms of affordable housing, clearly it will be a big part of what we are trying to do in terms of creating sustainable neighbourhoods. It's not going to be that we're just wanting to have 1-2 bed apartments. We want to have appropriate family housing. The evidence base will inform that in terms of, I guess, the housing needs. But we want to really, I guess fundamentally the central area is going to change. There's only going to be a lot more opportunities for significant open space, for family dwellings, because I guess we're not potentially going to use the central area for the retail like we have in most of our sort of life so far. So it will very much be looking at the detail of that. And I guess, the starting point will always be 30% affordable within every area, because that will tie in with the current Birmingham Development Plan policy, but that will be reviewed, and there'll be the allocations for that. But there'll be a significant amount, because we need to create sustainable neighbourhoods where people are going to live. We don't want it to be, 1-2 bed apartments, second homes, etc., etc.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay.
So I've got Councillor Zahir Khan.
Thank you for the presentation, Timothy. It's a good presentation, and it's been informative. And I just want to raise on from what Councillor Aitken has already asked, and it's also the slide which you got on. It clarifies some of the units, the hotels, the housing that will be available. What in particular I wanted to clarify was on this Smithfield site, how much of the house or apartments will be retained by the council itself, in terms of the council having the ability then to rent out this to families. That's the first question. And second question is that amongst those flats or housing apartments, how much of it will be prioritized for those families who are in need of it because they have children or other family members with disabilities and health problems?
Thanks, Fika. I mean, Richard, I mean, in terms of the sort of issues with the or the how we're going to deal with the Smithfield site, you might be better to come in with that, because clearly it's a joint venture and Lend-Lease will update their master plan, so maybe that will be answered by Richard in his presentation. But there, you know, there's clearly the joint venture agreement in place in terms of how we're going to deliver that and bring forward the sites and through their updated master plan and then application. So I guess, Richard, you're probably better to answer that in terms of the sort of requirements and how we're going to bring that forward. In terms of within the whole in the sort of central area in terms of housing need, we very much will work with housing colleagues, because the housing needs surveys and where there is our sort of council housing, that will clearly come into the sort of detail of the sort of types of housing and the requirements that we have to fulfill. So we will definitely do that. And of course, I guess around the Ray Valley area, we know that we have significant council housing around the sort of Highgate Park. So we would look to ensure that around that area over the sort of next 10, 20 years, there'll be the appropriate family housing built there, which will meet the housing needs. So it's very much it will be, you know, a sort of a team approach with all sort of colleagues, multidisciplinary approach with housing, with transport, to ensure that we are fulfilling up the requirements and the needs that we need to. So this is very much, I guess, the vision piece. We're looking at what the key principles are and the themes. Then we're starting to look at, okay, the areas, the central renewal areas. We'll have the consultants on board to look at, well, is that a viable plan? It's not just a good vision that will then be on, not realised. So we're then saying, no, it can be realised, and this is the sort of funding opportunities and how we can work with landowners and key stakeholders. But then there'll be the policy detail to ensure that we're bringing forward the sort of types of development and supporting the communities that we need to within the central area. So I hope that sort of helps and give you some confidence in terms of the sort of way that we all work.
Thank you, Timothy. If I can bring Richard in now at this point, and then he could probably answer that sort of question once he's completed his presentation.
Yeah. Okay. I'll bring the presentation back. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. Hopefully you can all hear me. Firstly, my apologies for being late. My technology wasn't working. My name's Richard Brown. I'm the project director for Smithfield. And I'm just going to take you through some slides and an update following the conversation we had at committee just around about a year ago. So I'll go through, and then we'll take questions, I think, potentially at the end, and we'll try and capture some of those comments that have already been tabled. So really just remind ourselves about the site. This is it edged in orange on this slide, and you can see the context and the relationship with the likes of Bullring to the north of the slide on the screen, and its relationship with the Chinese Quarter on the left-hand side of the screen, and really not so much visible, but obviously what will emerge around Ray Valley on the southern flank of the scheme on this image. So it's a sizable site. It's 17 hectares. and it's a significant part of the regeneration ambition for Southside. Tim, do you want to move on? So for those that I put this slide in here really just to give some remind ourselves of the context, because this has been a long journey. So in September of 16, this was the start of the process where Cabinet got behind the master plan to transform the markets for that site that we've just identified. And the ambition really is to put in a significant regeneration scheme which would help with the sort of the halo effect around the perimeter of the site. And there are already examples emerging where the emergence of Smithfield is starting to spark activity, and Tim's mentioned a few of them in his presentation in this part of the city centre. And he's also mentioned there about Ray Valley and the weight now it has under its own SPD supplementary planning document, and where that will go in terms of the central area and the opportunity it will provide, particularly around city living and including families. But as part of this journey, the council obviously realised it needed a development partner. This is a very big, ambitious scheme. It's turned out to be that the current numbers amount to around £2 billion worth of investment to realise the master plan as currently envisaged, and that requires obviously significant private sector investment. We'd like to move on. Yeah, so sort of continuation of the journey really. In middle part of 2017, procurement was underway. There was a dialogue with a short list of bidders, and ultimately towards the middle end of 2018, Lendlease emerged as the preferred bidder. And there was a long process between that appointment, that selection, and their entering into the development contract with the council in June of this year. And that was significantly around the fact that the scale of the project was probably way bigger than anyone envisaged, and therefore the legal requirements around it and the technicalities around it, and notwithstanding a conversation with EZ over grant funding to help manage the cost risk around infrastructure and public realm works. And the combination of that really led to a significant time period to get, say, from selection to contract. Do you want to move on, Tim? So a year ago, when I presented, we talked about actually what was going to happen as a next stage of events through the autumn of last year into the early part of this year. And there was a very long dialogue with Greater Birmingham Solihull Local Enterprise Partnership, the LEP, to understand the backing and even their own governance around how funding could materialise and the stage gates we'd need to go through. And to cut to the chase, we agreed with the LEP that we would actually introduce a new layer of approval, which was the strategic outline case. And we submitted one because of the challenges around, at that time, prosecuting an outline business case to ensure that we could reset and get the approval back on track. So we did that, and that met with their own board approval in the autumn of last year, and that enabled us to then move back into the legal discussion with Lendlease and get the contract lined up in the right way. So we had to sort of review our position to go forward, which was the right thing to do. So at the end of last year, we reset the section 123, which is the Local Government Act best price mechanism, and that was approved by Cabinet, and that then enabled us to get into the meat of the finalising the legal agreements, the joint venture agreement, the JVA, and other attendant documents, supporting documents. And that process, you can tell from this slide, took us 6 months because it's such a protracted and such a technical set of agreements to agree. We also agreed, given the reset of the business case strategy, that we would agree funding principles with Lend-Lease, not the funding agreements themselves through EZ, because that would have taken us a considerable amount of time more, and we were already under pressure really to get the contract lined up. So we agreed with all parties that we would agree principles. Those have been agreed, and obviously we've signed them relative to the joint venture agreement. But that does mean at a point next year we will need to enter into funding agreements once the outline business case at that point is more advanced. I want to keep going, Tim. So just again, as a reminder, or anyone that's not as familiar, this is sort of the headlines and headlines only of the emerging master plan. Just to remind ourselves, Lend-Lease took on the council's master plan from 2016, and of course have developed it, but developed it with a fairly small d. This is modest change because the cabinet approved the master plan in 2016, and obviously Lend-Lease responded to that. Obviously, given the commercial and economic situation that we're currently in, and have been for through Brexit, through COVID, there are a number of potentially moving parts here, and we'll touch on residential in a minute relative to the Lend-Lease response in that area, and really against in the sort of the wider context of the city centre. So an early phase of the scheme is to relocate and replace the new markets arena. So that will be a continuous situation where the markets stay open, new markets are created, and that then allows the continuation of that activity. Just to give you some timeline, I haven't got a programme set out here because it's a very detailed slide, but we are still probably around 2027 before the new markets are online. So we've still got a long way to go in the journey before we actually see real buildings operational. So the mixed use scheme, we talked about markets. There's commercial space in the form of offices and leisure, and around 2,000 residential units. Now that is going to be a blend of residential. Those numbers will potentially change relative to the take up, the requirements, and the context of the city centre. We talked about Ray Valley and the opportunity there, but the scheme itself is going to be a blend of apartments, family accommodation and affordable housing, which was always what was envisaged from the outset through the 2016 master plan. But the absolute detail of that will emerge as we go through the evolution of the master plan and through the consultation stages, which I'll come on to later in this presentation. The scheme, oh sorry, Tim, just go back one slide. Yeah, talking about EZ funding, the scheme has significant public realm, squares, parks, thoroughfares, new road infrastructure, new connectivity back through Digby, connecting the city centre back up in the context of the scheme itself. And also the integrated public transportation system, again, given its proximity to Digby. Do you want to move on to the next slide? Sorry, Tim, I'm trigger happy. There is obviously a social value benefit, and that's written into the joint venture agreement, and has been from the initial selection period, that obviously this comes with job creation, comes with opportunity for the community and the wider economy. As I mentioned at the start of the presentation, this is envisaging around £1.8 billion worth of private sector investment to make the scheme work, and that's a significant sum. We're looking at a quantum of around 130 million of EZ funding to help with public realm infrastructure funding and viability. GVA is significant, the gross value added, i.e. what it does to the wider economic region in terms of what it's generating in terms of that value. And we're now, as we speak, post-contract, we're now in the early stages of Lend-Lease revisiting the master plan and assessing that against the constraints, and that will include the residential component, all of the commercial components, whether it's offices, leisure, and we will then reassess that through a viability assessment at the end of this year. So as part of our contractual obligations, mutual contractual obligations, before we get into so many phases of the scheme, and there are 4 that are envisaged over the next 15 years, the first hurdle for us collectively, Council and Lend-Lease, is to assess that the scheme is viable and will work, not just from a design or a content perspective, but financially. We need to make sure that we can make this stand up to scrutiny, and we can therefore commit to the prosecution of the planning application during the course of next year. So we are in that space very soon. We're starting to get into that space now, and that will continue to the calendar year end. There are a couple of initiatives that the council is at the coalface for and in steering, and one is the business case, the EZ funding, the EZ grant, and I mentioned earlier that we've agreed some funding principles. We will then get into the meat of business case evolution through an outline business case early next year, and that will trigger the discussion around the EZ grant funding agreements. So the council is, with its relationship and its position with the LEP, will be in prime position to do that, and we will conclude those legal agreements, we expect, by the middle of next year. In addition, the other significant obligation that the council has in this scheme is land assembly, and that is to agree a land strategy that both parties can adhere to in terms of how it's going to go about securing and procuring the necessary land, not just the council's land, but third-party land to facilitate the development. So we will be prosecuting a compulsory purchase order, and there will be, in parallel with that, private treaty negotiations that we will be pursuing with third parties to secure the land in time and in parallel with the development programme that we are working to. And currently we are close to the markets in terms of the consultation process, the early stages of the consultation process with them about how we expect to bring forward and deal with the markets environment, the one that I mentioned earlier on, in terms of the new markets and the timescales around that, so that all those operators and traders understand the timescale and the programme agendas. We've also, as you'll have potentially seen on site, we've been undertaking enabling works, and this has been through and been realised through the demolition of 2 multi-storey car parks and an office building called Manor House. Now those buildings are significantly, if not completely, demolished, and sites is being cleared in time for the development, but also in time for the Commonwealth Games next year. So those works are on programme, and we are dealing with site clearance really by the end of this year. We've still got rubble on the site, and we're expecting to hand over to the Commonwealth Games early next year, and then that will be handed on to Lend-Lease at the end of the Games. So I've just very quickly merged those 2 elements together. But the handover to the organising committee of the Games is, say, February next year. Handback will be at the end of October, will be by early October. So all of that programme has been shared and agreed across the parties, including Lend-Lease, and we're on track to complete that process. Final slide really is around social value commitments. Now these have been set out in the joint venture agreement and the business plan, which is a fundamental element of the joint venture agreement in terms of Lendlease's commitment and its compliance with business charter and employment and training opportunities. Those are well understood, and the parameters that they work to are understood, and hence the entering into the business charter and social responsibility. I haven't declared it here, but consultation is a key element that we're now looking at with Lendlease. Their strategy relative to that consultation process is being finalised, but I think we can expect that council members and certain others will be subject to briefings in around November of this year, with future further consultations in Q1 of next year and the middle part of 2022. Really all gearing up to Lendlease promoting an application, planning application towards the middle of next year, which is the expected timeline we're working to. So that activity is planned, and so the detail will follow. We've already started, given the importance of the relationship around the markets, to have conversations with traders and chairs around the markets environment. That is a very, very quick rattle through on a project which is incredibly involved and technical, and I'm happy to take whatever questions you'd like to pose.
Thank you very much for that, Richard. And before I open it up to other members, I've just got a couple of quick sort of questions, and forgive me, this is from someone, obviously I understand that it's quite a technical report and it's coming from someone who's quite new to the report and this committee. The sort of first question is around the 10,000 jobs that are going to be created. I just wondered whether that figure is that inclusive of the construction jobs that are expected as part of obviously all this development. And the second one was around obviously this plan has taken a lot of work, and and obviously I can see that it's been going on for a number of years, a lot of the work in the background. What I was wondering with the pandemic, obviously we've seen, as Timothy previously mentioned, that the sort of use of offices and things like that, businesses have changed as a result of the pandemic, and I'm just wondering whether there has been any sort of work, or is there any planned work to kind of incorporate those changes in part of the plan?
Okay. Shall I just take that to start with for now?
Yeah, and if any other members would like to ask a question, if you just raise your hand, so then I know I take it in order then. Thank you, Richard. Yeah, Richard, if you just answer that, and if anyone else has any questions, then I'll take those.
So typically the jobs, yes, will include construction opportunities. That's already happened, and to some degree around, we've already had that experience around the enabling works, which is obviously the council's own enabling works for clearance of the site. That has included that opportunity, but equally it's beyond jobs, it's also included training. So for example, on the enabling works area that we're just concluding, that has included skills, it's included education and information sharing for students around sorts of, for example, archaeological digs and those kind of workshops. So it's often this kind of opportunity is not just about construction or employment or retail jobs or or that kind of ilk. It does include that opportunity for education and for training and for engagement. And when Lendlease pick up the site, they will continue with getting the site ready for construction. So that will continue through certain more archaeological investigation and more site investigation before buildings start to come out of the ground. So it's a very long journey around the opportunity for jobs and education in a project of this nature over such a long period of time. Typically at the outset it will be the construction phase, but it's got legacy, and typically the legacy is, way after the last brick's been laid, that you've created a platform for others to benefit, and that's very typical of a regeneration project of this ilk. In terms of timescales and pandemic, yes, that's been as you can imagine, that's been debated long and hard over the last 12 months, and we've captured what we understand really at the time that we entered into the contract with Lend-Lease in June, where we would be potentially looking at, in terms of pandemic, of the nature of COVID-19 or potentially any other outbreak, and some of that is obviously counter measures, but equally we're having to take, and Lend-Lease are reviewing now what potential impact that has around land uses, and where they still will need to make a commitment around things like offices. Offices are an important component. This is a central site. It is obviously removed somewhat from sort of the Snow Hill and the central business district, but there's always been an ambition here for offices that would fit the purpose and fit the context. And this is a technology area, IT tech area. There may well be a response in that nature to office space, which is commensurate with the area it's in. And I think, without going too far down the track, because we are going to see more of this as we go through the consultation from Lend-Lease about their master plan. You can expect, and you should expect them to respond in that way, that whilst the pandemic has hit, and it's hit certain areas significantly, there is equally research emerging that, well, there is life after the pandemic, and there are any number of papers by research organisations looking into those areas, and those will also inform the kind of decisions that will need to be made here. And it's an incredibly difficult area because you can also get conflicting research emerging. But I think even in spite of that, there are still some fundamentals here, even allowing for the pandemic, that haven't really overly changed the ambition of this scheme. And I've mentioned there, say, I've given you a flavour of where I think the office component is likely to be framed. And I think that will be the case. We're getting into the stage where consultation is on the doorstep, and you will start to engage in that process and see for yourselves what this looks like.
Thank you, Richard. Do we have any further questions from members? Councillor Lal, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, I welcome it's a very invasive plan, but the problem is we can't ask too many questions because in depth. Of course, this is still developing, it's evolving. But my question is that we need to have some kind of assessment of the current developments, whether they are benefiting all. I mean, we have promised that these developments will benefit everyone in the city. I'd like to know of all the current developments in terms of equality benefits and quality impacts. Have we done that or haven't? So that's to be lesson learned for our future developments. To make so that if by our findings we find that the opportunities are not being taken by benefiting everybody or being taken by everybody, then we need to find another way of delivering the benefits to the from the new developments. Thank you.
Shall I try and address that now?
Yes, Richard, if you...
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit, you're right, this is a, it's difficult to be too prescriptive, but there is the genuine intent of an ambition, and that's why Lend-Lease have signed into that social value situation, because they were always going to be held to account through, from the first time that they entered into this process, and it was important that they seem to promote that. This is this is a completely mixed-use scheme. It's holistic, and it will touch a great number of people in the community, both from opportunity, whether it's job, whether it's education, whether it's living there, whether it's experiencing the quality of the environment, you know, the leisure component, the cultural components. They are significant, and I haven't unfortunately had the time, and actually some of this is still evolving. So it is I cannot share with you today the master plan that's emerging, because it's still in confidence from Lend-Lease, and obviously to put that in the public domain would not be appropriate. So we're obviously, you know, having to tread carefully here, but those components that I've listed in the slides are relevant. They're not all of the moving parts, but they give a flavour as to what's coming here in terms of the mix of uses and the opportunities around them, whether that's, you say, living there or experiencing the quality of the environment, or the placemaking in terms of public realm and parks. So there's a huge amount here that you'd expect from a scheme of this size in a central location, and Lend-Lease will need to balance all of that and try and make this work so that actually it is viable, it's justifiable, it's sustainable. And that's a difficult balance, and that's something that we also from the council need to scrutinise to make sure they've got the balance right and that we can support it through the planning process. So it's a fairly woolly answer, I'm afraid, but there are so many interwoven layers that I think it will tick a number of boxes through you know, the placemaking, the opportunity, the job situation, the quality of the environment, and how people want to feel about it and spending time in that space.
Thank you, Richard. Do we have any other questions from members? I can't see anyone indicating. I've got one final question before we move on, Richard. So in terms of engagement, we know that around Digbeth, we've seen over the last decade or so, we've got a lot of independent businesses who've been sort of growing Digbeth as like a creative quarter.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering what engagement have you done with these sort of independent small sort of businesses to ensure that they're very much engaged in part of the redevelopment of the area and don't like essentially be squeezed out when the area does become gentrified.
I may not have the latest on this. I'm not aware at this stage, unless Lend-Lease have done this. So my apologies if I've got this slightly skewed. I'll answer in a different way, because going back to the comment I made around, if you like, sort of the office component or the expected office component, I think we can expect that there will be potentially large spaces, potentially even sort of quasi headquarter spaces. But I think equally and importantly, there will be flexible spaces that will afford, and this will be skewed, and this is the whole geography of the city. I think we're all acutely aware of the quality and the opportunity that Digbeth and its reputation from a technological perspective has created, and to actually ignore that would be completely the wrong thing to do. And I think Lend-Lease will respond to that and embrace that, because I think that's an opportunity that's staring everyone in the face, that you can provide space that will complement and maybe allow those businesses to grow. And I think that's got to be a significant point to bear in mind. I think if you engage in a development like this on the doorstep of something that's emerging, established, got a strong reputation, that would be the wrong thing to ignore. So I think it's fair to say that Lend-Lease will respond in that vein.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Richard, that clearly through my presentation and what I said about the draft Central Birmingham framework and the engagement that we'll do with that probably next spring, we will be ensuring, like Richard said, that there's that complementary role, that these areas are all connected, and they all really contribute to each other's, what is unique about them, what is their destination, what makes them, special, or what's their character. So we will ensure, I guess, in planning terms, that there's a framework and they all complement each other, and it's done in a consistent way.
Thank you both. Sorry,
Sorry, could I make a final statement on that? I think picking up Tim's point, sorry to cut across you, I didn't mean to be rude. I think it's really important to bear in mind that a scheme of this nature can't be a fortress. It does need to connect. If it doesn't connect, it won't work. So it's not really about trying to take away too much from other or adjacent spaces. It is about that connectivity. It is about that complementary nature of uses. Because if you do that, this will become a fortress, and no scheme of this nature has ever, in my opinion, ever been intended to be a fortress. It has to work with its adjacent neighbours.
Yeah.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Timothy. Thank you both for that presentation. I can't see any more questions, so we're just going to move on to our next item, which is item 5, and it's the Council's support to businesses. I'd like to welcome Ibrahim Bayat, Business Enterprise and Innovation Manager, who's stepping in for Mohammed Zahir, who was unable to join us due to family commitments. Firstly, I'd like to pass my thanks on to Mohammed for producing the report at such a short notice, and to Ibrahim for joining us today. Thank you, it's really appreciated. Ibrahim will be talking to us about the support to businesses in Birmingham since the start of the pandemic. And as we've emerged out of lockdown up to date, the committee previously looked at this last year as part of the economic recovery work that the council have been involved in. So I'd like to hand over to Ibrahim now, who's going to outline some of the key points that are in the report that's in the agenda pack. Over to you, Ibrahim.
Okay. Firstly, good morning to all. Before I move actually to the report and going and summarising, just to make sure that when I share this screen, everybody can actually see the report. Just one moment. Please let me know when you can see it. Is it visible?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for confirming. Okay, as Councillor Suleiman mentioned, the purpose of this report is just to give an overview of the support that became available around this time last year, and I'm sure we're all happy that we're out of that, and hopefully we carry on out. And the support was actually available from that time and continued up until formally until the end of March, but the payments carried on for applications that came in up till June 2021. So I'll be providing a little bit of an overview on the monies that have already been spent, and approximately £33 million was made available, which was the discretional monies that we received under the flagship of the additional restriction grant, which is separate to the local restrictions grant scheme, which were the mandatory entitlement type grants that revenues teams delivered. And also I'll provide a I'll provide a little bit of a summary of the scheme that we launched on the 13th of September, which was in lieu of us being able to deliver this first set of monies, we were able to draw down another £7 million, which we have put towards 2 schemes. Okay, so without any further delay, we received altogether just shy of £33 million. This covered the period of the restricted tiers while we were in tier 2 and tier 4 and the lockdown 2, if everybody remembers that, and then carried on into the lockdown that came about in the new year. So the monies were provided to support the problems or the impact that businesses had beyond what could be covered by the local restriction grant schemes and So what we delivered was a main program, as well as a lot of side programs that were put together dependent on needs of the businesses in our region. So the main program, the way we worked was we did one application. We did one application for whether they thought they qualified for the mandatory schemes or whether they thought they qualified for the additional restriction grant scheme. This was triaged by the scheme that looked after the local restriction scheme. And if they felt there was, if it was determined that there was an impact, but it couldn't be covered through the mandatory schemes, the application was then referred on to our team, who then looked at the application. So that on this table is provided as ARG1 and ARG2. So ARG1 covered the original restrictions and pre-2021 months where there was a lockdown and restriction period. Under that, we supported 2,744 businesses, and as the impact carried on into the new year and more monies were made available, we were able to provide ARG2, which continued and covered the period between January and the end of March. Altogether, we supported business. We made payments to 6,222 under two different schemes. Also, there was in last year summer there was the discretionary business grant scheme, and also the original retail and leisure scheme, and also the small business grant scheme. And unfortunately, that didn't cover those hospitality businesses and hospitality and leisure businesses that were in the upper remit in terms of rateable value over 51k. So there was through the chamber and other stakeholders, the approach was made for that particular sector, and 330 businesses in that sector received a one-off 10k, because before that there was no support for a whole period where others had received between 25k and 10k already. And generally it was to do with a lot of businesses, big businesses in the city centre that had a massive turn down, and unfortunately hadn't been provided with any relative support. Similarly, the taxi sector, all the way from the start of the pandemic till this region, had not been provided with any support, and mirroring and after liaising with the local adjacent local authorities, we put together a scheme where anybody that was in Birmingham, that was a registered Birmingham licensee in terms of a taxi driver, was provided with £1,000, and 3,833 businesses were supported via that. Additionally, we also had what this funny acronym means is we had a scheme that mirrored exactly what the mandatory close scheme provided, because there was a whole supply chain sector that could stay open but had no customers. So because all of their custom was closed. So this was delivered by revenues, and what it did was the same amount of monies that were available to the closed businesses were made available to the supply chain businesses that fell into the same category, because providing they were wholly and exclusively delivering, and their customer base was made up of the businesses that were closed, were provided with firstly the period post 2021, and as the funding increased and the impact stayed, we then provided a secondary payment, which was this payment here of 3.4 million, and altogether just over 1,200 payments were made via that as well. I am not going through the sectors, but within the actual report, you can see the different types of businesses that were provided with support, and it's quite a mixed amount, as you can see. Supermarkets is a zero, and there's an obvious reason for that because they were open and the impact was minimal. Although there were smaller retail outlets that sometimes did, if they could evidence the support, the impact were provided with support, which came under the retail category. Similarly, there's a ward breakdown and a constituency breakdown. I am not going to go through these in this meeting. Coming to most recently, we've now received £7 million. We've had it for around a month or so, and this 7 million, we through Cabinet had an approval very early on, after liaising with the business community, the chamber, bids. We put together two elements. One was a recovery element and one was a discretionary restart element. The discretionary restart, starting with that, even though it's in a different order in the paper, is a one-off 5K, which was made available for all of those businesses that are in these sectors that post 1st of April, it was recognized by the government that they still are impacted, either because they couldn't open because some of the businesses were delayed, and also some because they just opened and they needed that little bit of a kick to get back on the ground. Although, because of the way the schemes were designed, they were only designed to be paid for those that have the business pays the RV themselves. In other words, the rates is in their name. And we found, delivering all the different schemes that we've delivered throughout the pandemic, 18 months, that there's a number of businesses that they're not the landlord, sorry, they're not just the landlord, they're not the rateable payer, and hence don't qualify for the monies that is generally trying to be aimed at the business. So we've created a 5K one-off for only those businesses that explicitly fall into the same definition as the restart scheme, but for whatever reason could not draw down the restart grant because of a qualification that was put on the mandatory version of the restart. And we've also launched the recovery scheme, which is around providing access to all sectors that are SMEs in the city, providing there is safeguarding of jobs. In other words, they're able to carry on being a sustainable business or grow on the basis that they're investing into a project that either has come about because of the impact of COVID or because they're having to diversify. In fact, one of the themes we have not mentioned here, providing they're not asking for something that's not ineligible, is we've clearly said that if there's any cost that they have or they want us to consider, provide that don't fall into these categories, but are for them is a direct response to the pandemic and will allow them to recover and become more sustainable going forward. We provided that as well. The scheme's been very, very popular already. It's only been open since the 13th of September. We received over 360 applications. The applications are worth 3.6 million, and 2.2 million of the applications that have been made are for the recovery scheme, which is what we envisage would be the case. That concludes my part of the presentation, and on to questions, really. If anybody has any questions, please pass them on.
Thank you. Before I open up questions, I've got questions, so I can echo back.
Okay. Did you want me to keep the report open, or is that fine?
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. I think members have got a copy of the report. So I've got a couple of questions. I think the first one was, what support was given to businesses that may have struggled to apply with the grant, maybe due to digital literacy sort of issues. Second one is around, so was there any feedback collected during the delivery of the first few grants in order so we can learn lessons on how we could improve delivery, or what worked well, what didn't, and what improvements could be made.
Okay. Start with regards to the support that was made available. There was a telephone line that was connected to the contact center, as well as we had a dedicated mailbox, and anywhere where anybody had difficulty, and we did do this on instance, was we would call them and make the application on their behalf. So walk through the application. We do a lot of business support work anyway, and we're aware of this, and hence we did make that available. With regards to lessons learned, the scheme that was delivered in the summer of last year, not the summer that just gone, we had done an impact-based model where businesses were required to put in a lot of information about pre and post lockdown, and then we applied formulas with regards to how much they'd lost and not lost, and decided on that. But by winter, we'd realised, and the length of the restrictions had obviously really set in, and we realised this. It was more based on if they could explain the impact well and it made sense, then it was good enough for us to make a decision on the application, rather than having to do long calculations and giving trouble to businesses when they're already in trouble. Although there was instances where if the businesses were still open, they would have to prove their impact and why there was impact. So yes, we did take some lessons on, and we amended things where and where we can.
Thank you, Ibrahim. So I've got Councillor Lal and then Councillor Aiken.
Yep, no problem.
Technically, businesses who had our help, or the government help, how many of them are still struggling, and do we know how many have been impacted beyond or even our best efforts to save them? So how many businesses are we seeing being closed as the COVID impact? And thirdly, there is concern that some fraudulent applications were made. Do we know what percentage of fraudulent applications made to the council?
The audit work is still going on, and wherever we're finding any fraudulent cases, they're being handled by the recovery team. The revenues team have set up a small team for recoveries. On the ARD and the discretionary fund, the percentage is not as high, and it's purely because the numbers were smaller as well. But yes, we're doing some work around that. I would not be able to provide you with a perfect stat with regards to how many businesses have closed post our support, but at the time of us providing the support, one of the requirements was that the business was actually still actively trading, which was part of the assessment, and made them eligible for the monies at that time. With regards to future support for already struggling businesses, we did feed into a number of requests. The letter that was made on behalf of the local authority, the Chancellor, we requested in that, we put request in that letter, as well as there was a report that was put together by the Chamber and the wider chamber in terms of the Midlands. We fed into that as well, and that request went up to government as well. So it's definitely recognised that there's still impact, and we've done what we can with regards to feeding into getting more support for that. But we're at the ball is in the, if I can say, the ball is in the central government's court now with regards to what they announce. There is the UK Prosperity Fund that has been discussed for a long time now, and that will be the post-Brexit support that will be made available. but whether that takes into consideration directly to do with COVID and pandemic, I wouldn't be able to answer that. I'm not privy to, but I can say that what they're provided now is what's there for until March 2022. Okay.
Thank you, Ibrahim. So we've got Councillor Aiken now, please.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Lal stole my question there, but I've had a thought of something kind of a parallel to that, and you might not have the answer to this, so I apologise if I put you on the spot. But do you have any sort of figures on what, like, businesses that have been set up kind of since the lockdown restrictions have been lifted? I'm just wondering whether the last sort of 18 months, 2 years has had much of an effect on people setting up businesses. Obviously, we've talked a lot about supporting businesses that already exist, and a lot of businesses have gone out of business. I just wondered if we have any sort of metrics on new businesses.
Unfortunately, we could probably ask our economy strategy team to do stats of based on dates to find out exactly how many businesses were available, were active at one time and then another time, but I haven't got that to hand. What I can say anecdotally is I've had a number of meetings with businesses that are early in their lifetime that are trying to access the recovery fund. And we also purposely set up the recovery fund so that even very new businesses within what we couldn't do was just say startup businesses, because people would just then set up businesses to access the fund, which is not what we're trying to do. So we put a really short period of 3 months. If they could show us 3 months worth of trading, we're happy to consider them for the recovery fund. And being able to access 50k at a 75% rate, and I've been doing this for a long time, I can assure you this hasn't been available like this before this. So that's what we've done. Doesn't fully answer your question, but we have thought about this already.
No, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, that's kind of good enough answer for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Do we have any further questions? Okay, I can't see any more. So thank you very much for that, Ibrahim. So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the work programme. So the work programme's been amended to reflect the changes following last month's meeting. Calendar invites have gone out for all meetings. So in November, we've got the economic impacts on Birmingham's nighttime economy, culture, leisure and hospitality sectors in relation to the Birmingham Development Plan and residential developments and COVID-19 recovery. So I'd like to hear if members have any thoughts on who they'd like to invite to this session alongside the council officers. We've also got Councillor Francis Cabinet Members Update, which is now going to be in January to fit in with diaries. So if there's any thoughts or requests, please feel free to raise them now or drop me or Basima a note. Thank you. So does anyone have any thoughts that they'd like to share now, or you can raise this later with myself or Basima? Okay. Sorry?
What did you say? I thought I missed it.
So yeah, I was just asking whether members have any thoughts on who they'd like invited to the next meeting alongside the council's officers on the nighttime economic impacts of the economy.
Either your future work program we're talking about.
Yeah, so we're talking about the work program.
Remember, I think from our earlier discussion, we don't want to look at, yes, we want to look at nighttime economy, but the way I look at nighttime economy, don't start at night, they start early in the afternoon or midday. So really, we should be embracing leisure, culture, and hospitality and entertainment in general.
Okay, We can take that on board. Discuss how we. So what you're saying, Councillor Lal, is that look at it as the leisure, the impact of culture, leisure, and hospitality in a wider way, as opposed to just on the nighttime economy.
Yes, yeah, the whole thing. Yeah.
Okay, all right. We can look at that. So, do any other members have any comments that they'd like to make at this point? Okay, we'll move on to item 7, which is a request for call-in. Are there any requests for call-in? No? Okay, so we'll move on to item 8, any other urgent business? So is there any other urgent business members would like to raise? Okay, so I can't see anyone indicating. It's quite difficult online to kind of gauge if there's any hands up. No, I can't see any. So we'll move on to item 9, which is authority to chairman and officers to act. Do I have the authority to act between meetings?
Yes.
Agreed. Yes, agreed.
Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you all at the next meeting. So that concludes our meeting, which is on the 3rd of November.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.